Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We have a really special program with some really special guests this evening, and I will introduce them. But before I do, I want to thank them very, very much for being here and for what I think is a really important conversation. I'm going to do this purely by age, so there will be ageism in the introduction, the order of the introductions. I apologize for that right now. We'll work from oldest to youngest, so you'll know who the oldest person here is. And then we're going to start talking about some issues in race and sports and some other related subjects. But let's begin with the elder statesman here. Immediately to my left is Vernon Law. Vernon Law was popularly known as the Deacon in Major League Baseball. He won the Cy Young Award in 1960 during a season during which he pitched the Pittsburgh Pirates into the World Series. Won 2 games in the World Series, would have won the 3rd one, but he was taken out by Danny Murtaugh, which opened the door for Bill Mazeroski to hit one of the most famous home runs ever hit in Major League Baseball history. Vernon grew up in Meridian, Idaho, and then went into Major League Baseball, and that'll be a part of the conversation in a moment. But first of all, Vernon Law.
Thank you.
Second, on the far end is James Grant, who is popularly known as Mudcat. Jim Mudcat Grant, who, by the way, when we get this whole library put together, I want your name on it, because it's been one of the founding fathers of a project we're doing here, the African American Experience in Major League Baseball, in which we're recording oral histories of the African American players who played in the 25 years after Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby broke baseball's color line. Mudcat was also one of the great pitchers of the 1950s and 60s, and in 1965, Mudcat should have won the Cy Young Award, and today, 49 years later, he'll still tell you how pissed off he was that he didn't win the Cy Young Award. But he pitched the Minnesota Twins into the World Series, won 2 games in the World Series. The unfortunate part of the story is he won Game 6. The good part is he won Game 6, got a home run in Game 6, power hitting pitcher there. The bad part of the story is Game 6 was Game 6, and Sandy Koufax pitched Game 7 for the Dodgers. So the Twins didn't get the World Series championship, but Mudcat has had a great career, both as a starting pitcher and as a relief pitcher. So Jim Mudcat Grant. That is true. Well, I swear. There's always something extra. We'll talk about that. In the middle, the youngest of the entire set, probably by a pretty good long ways, actually, is somebody you all know and love. The co-host of Max and Marcellus, the co-host of ESPN Sports Nation, a major ESPN personality. By the way, one of the, and again, I hate seeming to flatter people, because I don't flatter people. I really will not BS. Really, one of the best conversationalists in radio, if not the best. The Max and Marcellus show is certainly some of the best sports talk radio. And when you guys decide to be some of the smartest sports talk radio, although you have to kind of drag Max along on that one. In all of radio, also an all-pro NFL defensive end, and an all-around great guy, Marcellus Wiley. Although I will say he did not pitch in the World Series, so, but you know, neither did I. So that makes 2 of us up here. I want to talk a little bit first of all. You know, your childhood really shapes your life and your perception in terms of values and issues of race and other situations. So I want to talk a little bit about your childhood and how it shaped you. And I want to start with Mudcat. The far left. Mudcat Grant grew up in Lucucci, Florida, in the darkest days of the Jim Crow South. This is the 1930s and 1940s. Mudcat, could you talk to us, first of all, about what it was to live in the black section of Lucucci as opposed to the white section of Lucucci?
this on?
Are we good?
Testing, one,
Yeah,
two. You can hear me now, right?
Okay.
I was born in Lacucci, Florida, a little lumber mill town in Lacucci, Florida. Population about 255. About 255, let me put it that way. And most of us were lumber mill hands. And I was born in 1935. And the way Lacucci was run, we had a railroad track that passed through Lacucci, that split Lacucci in half. And like I say, when I say about 250 to 300 people, that's black people on one side of town, and then on the other side of town, across the railroad track, was about 250 to 275 whites. And that's the way Lacucci existed back in those days. We had two schools. We had two elementary schools. We had one for white and one for blacks. Our living quarters were all also separated somewhat. My mom was a slave 9 years of her life, and my grandma was a slave for all of her life. Nonetheless, the time at that time was a point where you sought to sort of get along and not go on this side of town and not go on that side of town. That's the way it existed, and that's the way it practically ended up, even though it's a town now where everybody pretty much lives where you want to live. After a period of about 40 years or 45 years, we learned one thing. Baseball, and I'm so glad to see the deacon here, baseball did something for us during that time. Baseball pretty much taught us how to live together, how to exist together, how to become educated together, how to be supportive together. At this day and time, it's a town that exists relatively in pretty good shape when it comes to a social standpoint. That's the way Lacucci is today. But back in the day, a little bit later on, we'll get a chance to talk about some of the times when it really wasn't that way.
Let's talk for just a minute about the times that it really wasn't. What were the living conditions? What were the difference in the living conditions in terms of electricity and other?
And another thing, Dan, I have to apologize to you, and kids, I have to apologize to you too. I am going to ask you from time to time, what did you say?
Sorry.
Because after turning 79, 80, you know, you don't hear too good, but your voice is crisp.
Well,
It's not southern like, you know what I mean? Now, what was that again?
I said, let's talk for a minute about conditions in Lacucci, the actual conditions.
Yeah.
What was the difference in living conditions, first of all, in terms of electricity and water and other?
Electricity?
Yeah.
I can tell you a story about that. Wait, back in those times, we had lamps. We didn't have electricity. We had wooden stoves at this time. We didn't have electricity for wooden stoves. In fact, I was lucky enough to meet President Kennedy, who sent for me to discuss some things one year back in the first year he was the President of the United States of America. In my conversation with him, he asked me some of the same questions. What about this town that you're from called Lacucci? I said, it's Lacucci. He said, oh, excuse me, Lacucci. But he was a baseball fan, and he read about Lacucci, Florida. And we had a lot of discussions about Lacucci, Florida. And I was educated on 4 books. We had hand-me-down books at that time. So the books that was handed down to us didn't have all of the pages in them. So what we would do is that we would take the books that had numbers, and we would make our own books. So for each class, we could come up with about 4 or 5 books, and we were all educated on those 4 or 5 books, well educated, by the way. And when I told him that, he wanted to help to some extent, and he did help. Besides education, the housing, we were able to get housing because of President Kennedy. And the reason I want to tell you this story, we were talking about electricity. Back in those days, housing wasn't like it is today. There was no bathrooms. It was something that you had to go in the back to do, right? So anyway, Mom, I was in the major leagues at that time, and Mom called me up, and she said, son, when we got the new housing and stuff like that, so of course we got a bathroom. So Mom called me up, and she said, son, I want you to hear something. And so she would flush, she said, she would flush the toilet. I said, what is that? She said, you know what it is. She said, and that's the way LaCouture was back in those days. But despite what happened back in those days, we were well educated because of the fact that President Kennedy made sure that we got the books and the education assets that we needed.
And just one more quick question. Tell us a little bit, you talked about your mom. Tell us what she built next to the log holder by the fireplace and why.
Well, we were rushing forward, but back in those days, it was very difficult to survive in one way or another based on what you had to face. We had to face, back in those days, circumstances where there were castrations, there were hangings, and so forth and so on. And when we talk about this nowadays, and we want to make sure that the students understand, is that we discuss it with no horrible, bad feelings towards anyone, because that was the way the circumstances was back in those days. But what Dan is talking about is that the Ku Klux Klan was around in those days, and you had to learn how to survive. We're talking about 1944, 45. And what the Ku Klux Klan would do is that they would come through our little town twice a month. And we only had one road that circled the town that came through housing and so forth and so on. And what they would do is that they would shoot in our homes, and it was every other Thursday night. And to survive, what Mom did was that we didn't have lights, electricity, but we did have a fireplace. And what she did is that she made a wood box that was large enough to the point where when the firing would start, she would put us in the wood box, and underneath was some ropes where she would let us down by the fireplace so that we wouldn't be hit, by a stray bullet or whatever there was. But that was the way that we survived. Now, the one thing about all of this is that, and sometimes in discussing this, it's sort of unbelievable a little bit, because back in 1940 and 45, we still used drums to talk. And the Ku Klux Klan headquarters was about 60 miles away. And when it came towards LaCouture, Florida, of course, you could hear the talking drums. Nobody knew exactly what it was, but we could understand. So we were always ready when that circumstance happened, when they would come through town and start shooting. We would already know to get in that wood box so that we could be lifted down underneath the house where we wouldn't be harmed and that type of thing. So it went on, that went on up until 1952 or 53 or something like that. But that's how we survived back at that time. And again, I want to make sure you understand that in those days when you had to live like that, it doesn't mean that when you discuss it today that you harbor any ill thoughts towards anybody. That's just the way life was back in those days. And thank goodness that your family or your mom was smart enough to make sure that we survived.
Thank you. Marcellus, let's talk about a completely different world on the opposite side of the country, in a different generation, but one that still is a generation that is dealing with racial strife. You were born in Compton, correct?
Yes.
And grew up there. Talk a little bit about that and your experience in Compton and how that helped shape your understanding of your place in the world and what the world was like.
Yeah, growing up in Compton, it's interesting that you started to learn at a young age some of the adversities that you were going to face in this world that were placed on you pretty much as they put your name on your birth certificate. They put issues and hurdles in front of you. And I remember knowing about the drugs, having interaction with the neighbors and the families in the neighborhood, the gangs, the poverty. But at a young age, I really took notice to that the most disturbing element in my community was the low ambition, that everyone had changed their focus and their aim to lower standards based on these adversities that were placed in our community. And racially, it wasn't even divided at the time. It didn't feel that way. It was very isolated, pure definition of a ghetto, it felt like, in the sense of all I knew were black people. You would watch television and you would see whites on television. Every now and then you would see a Latino, but the first introduction to really different races and ethnicities happened on the football field, happened through athletics. Showing up at the public park and signing up at the age of 7 to play football, and you look in a huddle and it's not all just blacks, you know, and it's the first time that I really understood that, wow, not only do they exist, as crazy as that sounds, but we have some things in common. We have obviously some things of difference. And the familial aspect didn't start until that process occurred on a football field. And just never growing up knowing that the perception of me wasn't reality, because I never had opportunity before those moments to step outside the neighborhood. But thanks to my athletic success and my ability to travel and run track, and we would have national meets and national tournaments and games, you started to become more familiar with other races and ethnicities and their issues. But growing up, it was a very isolated environment that really a lot of the issues that I felt were intra-community, were really black on black, whether it was based on skin tone, it was based on cred that was given based on the negativity and almost perceived level of internalization of the negativity. The harder you were, the better you were in the community, and how that pecking order and paradigm was really off to me, and how I was being teased for trying to do the right thing, and how I was being teased for trying to strive. Walking with your backpack on was a bad thing, but walking with a bandana was a good thing. And it was a tough dichotomy to really understand the different divides and to really find your way once you made the right choice.
So you talked a little bit about the perception of you. And the perception of you then was as a guy who carries his backpack and is serious about moving forward. What was your perception of yourself?
Interesting. Talking to my mother, who was a straight A student until she had my sister at age 17, me at age 19, and basically committed her life to just sacrificing for us and not pursuing college or any other career endeavors. My perception of me, I remember being like 6 years old and looking around, and funny enough, it was after a spelling bee, and I was like, I'm kind of smart. You know, I was looking around at my family. I was like, my mama was smart, and I'm kind of smart. And then I remember going around the neighborhood, and I was faster than the 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. Started getting a little iffy, but I could beat a lot of people in my neighborhood. I was like, I'm kind of fast. I'm kind of good at this sports thing too. And I started to, the image of Superman just kept coming to my head of, like, I have a cape on me, and in my family, I'm going to be Superman. And whether it's through my academics, whether it's through my athletics, somehow I'm going to help my family escape this. And I'm going to help them escape this because I'm going to do the best I can in both of those worlds. And so my identity of myself was pretty much forged in that moment. And my grandmother did something very profound at the moment I kind of laughed at. She told me after some guys were teasing me and I was getting bullied at school and everyone was making me feel bad for trying to do the right thing. And I remember coming to her and saying, Grandma, you know, these boys keep messing with me and every day after school they punch me in the chest. And she says, I want you to come here and grab me a piece of paper and a pen. And I said, all right. And she said, write down your name. And I wrote down my name, Marcellus Vernon Wiley. And she said, okay, write down 3 things you are. And I said, okay, well, I'm kind of smart, Grandma. I got second place in the spelling bee. That's a whole nother story why I didn't win, but I tell you that. And then I wrote down, okay, I'm athletic because I'm good in football and I'm good in track. And she's like, all right, give me one more thing. And I wrote down, I guess I'm nice. Like, a lot of people like me other than them boys that beat me up every day after school. Everyone else seems to like me. I'm nice. And she said, baby, keep that piece of paper, ball it up, and put it under your bed. And whenever someone calls you anything on that piece of paper, you listen to them. And anytime they say anything else that's not on that piece of paper, you don't listen to them. And that kind of gave me the railroad of understanding of like, all right, if you're not with me, you're against me. And if you're against me, why am I listening to you? And that really helped me kind of start to understand and crystallize all the issues that were coming forward.
Connecticut. Mm-hmm. The only word that I ever lost a spelling bee in my life on.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I got one. I lost on the word queen.
Queen?
You guys laugh. Okay, here we go. Spell queen. I ain't hear you guys kind of whispering. Everybody's nervous, like, do I know how to spell queen? Spell queen. Okay, if you say that at a spelling bee, you'll be just like me and get second place. This is what happened. I said Queen, and the teacher said, Queen Elizabeth was a beautiful woman. Spell queen? There it is, capital Queen. I lost because I didn't capitalize queen. Just wrong, just wrong.
I missed one C in Connecticut.
Oh,
but, the middle cut. But one other question here, and it interrelates with something I'm going to ask Vernon. By the way, we have 2 Vernons here. You talk about Compton is in the middle of one of the great megalopolises in the entire world, and certainly the media center of the world. You talk about isolation. What was it that made you feel so isolated there?
I mean, there are a lot of reasons. The socioeconomics, obviously. You think about, like, I was a guy who grew up until the age of 20. Now I'm already out the house in college. I had never went north of Wilshire Boulevard. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and never went north of Wilshire Boulevard. I was a guy that stayed in my neighborhood, as they always say, you know, freeway to freeway. And if you were lucky, you would see the ocean. Like, I lived off of Rosecrans Avenue, which if you just continue to travel west, it actually hits the ocean. I never went to the beach my entire life one time until one day, you know, post-career NFL, I'm actually living on Manhattan Beach in the Strand, and then I'm driving one day, I'm like, Rosecrans? From Compton all the way to Manhattan Beach? And that's where my world ended up leading me to. But the isolation really comes from the fact that because of that lower ambition, because of the internalized, you know, issues, that people don't even want to seek beyond. And my family didn't. We felt very safe, even though it was a dangerous element always around us. We felt comfortable in our own comfort zone because we knew the rules of that land. And for whatever reason, no one wanted to journey outside of those borders. And it was tough because Yeah, I learned of so many things by watching television, hearing stories, and then these weekend trips in the summer of, wow, I just went to New York finally. Wow, I finally went to Arizona because of the track meets. But going back home and not having any shared experiences with anyone else, I couldn't tell them about it. They didn't understand how many different roads there were up an actual mountain. They just thought it was just this way or no way. And that was a difficult process because you felt the loneliness in that experience as you wanted to share it with others.
Yeah. Very interesting. Now, speaking of isolation and roads up mountains and out of valleys, Vernon Law, you grew up, good heavens, in one of the most isolated places in the history of the world, small town Meridian, Idaho, and at that, in a really a very enclosed community. And you had very limited experience of people, certainly of people of color or of any race. Talk a little bit about your, or any other race I should say, talk a little bit about your childhood growing up there and how that shaped your understanding of people and the world and your place in the world.
Well, let me say, first of all, am I clear? Have I done something here that,
No, you're good.
is it working all right? Yeah. Okay. First of all, I'd say it's an honor and privilege to be here. I enjoy young people. Like being around young people. I don't think I've ever grown up.
Who did you throw bad in practice?
Ask my wife, she'll tell you that I've never grown up. I still drive like a teenager. And, you know, but yes, I did live in a very isolated area. I was born and raised on a farm, you know, and I learned how to work. All of us has had an opportunity to rise above, you know, our environment, you know, our place in life at that time, and we've excelled in various capacities in sports. Sports is a great lifesaver for a lot of people. I had a kind of a rough growing up period. My dad was very stern. He asked you to do something, you did it. You know, he didn't ask why or you did. Well, he had a strap that that, you know, I felt more than once by not moving right then and there when he asked me to do something. But I respected him and loved him, and in spite of that strap, you know, it didn't have hooks on it or anything, but but it did sting when he used it. Fortunately, being born and raised on a farm, we had pigs, animals. I milked cows by hand. You know, we had all these animals to take care of, and we had an 80-acre ranch in which we had to weed the corn rows and so forth, and those rows looked a mile long when you started, and it was a tough life. I remember working for a neighbor in a hayfield, doing hard work, by horse and wagon, and loading hay and tramping it down and then stacking it in a stack and those kinds of things. It was hard work for a kid that was 12 years of age. We'd get up 5 o'clock in the morning and go down, bring the cows up, milk them, and then the feeding of the other animals, the chickens, the pigs, and so forth took place. We did have a separator in which we cranked to pour the milk in and crank it and get the cream off of the milk and those kinds of things. But working in that field for that length, you know, it took about 7 days to clear a field, and I'd get $1 a day for doing that. I was really proud to take 7 silver dollars and give it to my folks, because I was born during the Great Depression. We didn't have anything really. We made our own toys. You you know, and today I think it helped me because I'm a heck of a good carpenter. I can make anything out of wood, and I enjoyed that. You know, I enjoyed doing that. I saved my kids a lot of money. I built complete bedroom sets and those kinds of things, you know. And so, yeah, it was growing up. It was not easy. If our entertainment maybe came, you could go to a movie, which was 6 miles away. We had to walk to get there and walk to get back, and made sure we got back in time to milk the cows and take care of the animals. Usually it was on a Saturday. And you could go to the movie for 10 cents, and you'd have a nickel left over to get popcorn, you know, and that was a treat for us. I mean, that's really our only entertainment. I went to a country school, 2 rooms, 1 fireplace, or one stove actually, and I always tried to get near that stove, you know, because of you know, that's the only way you could get warm. You know,
It's Idaho in winter.
Right.
You want to be close to the
well,
stove.
we lived 1.25 miles away from there, and there was no school buses. We walked both there and back, and my kids always say, yeah, it was uphill going and uphill coming back, wasn't it, Dad? You know, so.
Let's talk a little bit about, this is a very isolated, enclosed world, and your world is pretty much bound by working on the farm, by your faith and your church, but also you begin to get engaged in sports. How did you begin to get engaged in this environment in baseball?
Well, I actually had no coaching whatsoever. We had no coaches in grade school. After graduating from grade school, and this, you go back to 1941, when the war broke out, we moved to California. Lived in Fairfax, California to begin with, and then later over to Santa Rosa, and that's where I started really with anything organized as far as sports was concerned. And because I lived on the farm, I was always throwing rocks at birds or trying to hit knock insulators off of telephone poles and those kind of things. And so I developed good hand-eye coordination. And so because I developed that way, I was able to throw the ball pretty well. And like I say, I could throw strikes. And so.
How were you discovered? Because again, this is
this is interesting. Yes.
We are talking a remote location here.
Well, again, after the war, we went back to Meridian, and like I say, this was a small town. We only lived 10 miles from Boise, which was the capital, but we hardly ever got there for anything. But we did in sports. We moved, and we had an organized team there in Meridian. Our farmers were my teammates. These guys in football, we only had 6 points scored against us, and that's playing against the big schools, Nampa, Boise, Caldwell. Those were the biggest towns around, and we were pretty good. We challenged anybody in the state to you know, and we got no answers from them. They didn't want to play us. But anyway, with baseball, it happened in well, it was my junior. I was a junior in high school when all this kind of come together. I kind of developed along the way and learned a little about baseball, but I didn't even have, you know, like I say, no coaching. I had no wind-up whatsoever. Just to illustrate, my brother was my catcher, and he'd give me a sign. Well, I'd just go like this and rear back and throw it. You didn't have all this fancy stuff that they do, you know, kick up and, you know, and really have a nice wind-up. So this so happened to be a tournament we were playing in Harmon Killebrews town, where he was born and raised in Payette, and we had a ball game in which the score was 0-0, and I don't remember the sequence, but my brother either hit a double and I got a base hit to drive him in the last inning, and or maybe I hit the double and he got the base hit to drive. I don't remember the sequence, but we had a 1-0 lead in the last inning, and so I take my warm-up pitches, and so here up walks a hitter, but he only was about that high. He was a midget, and he had a uniform on, had a small bat. Of course, he's up there to get a base on balls. And my brother come out the mound, and he says, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess we're going to have to pitch to him. He's got a uniform, you know, he's part of the team." And so I said, "Okay, go back, just get right down, kneel right down on the ground right behind him, put your glove down there, and I'll try and hit it." Well, because of all the experience I had of throwing the things, why, I threw 3 straight strikes and struck him out. And there happened to be a gentleman sitting in the stands who was a lawyer and very good friend of Bing Crosby's. And Bing Crosby had bought an interest in the Pirates. And so being good friends with him, and he had some clients in Hollywood, Wallace Berry, none of you remember these names, I'm sure, but anyway, he had some clients, and so we were good friends with Bing Crosby. They hunted and fished together. Idaho was always good for those kinds of things. And so he called Bing Crosby and says, "Bing, we got a suspect here in Idaho. You better call Pittsburgh and have them send out a scout." Well, they did that. And so, as it turned out, they sent out Babe Herman, who played for the Dodgers many years ago, and also my attorney, Welker, he has set some things up that I wasn't even aware of, but we had after graduating, we had 9 different organizations at my house wanting me to sign. I don't know how everybody knew about this because there was no scouting system back there.
When you strike out a midget, people hear about it.
Yeah, well, that might be true, but back then I wasn't aware of much of anything. You know, I was just kind of a runny-nosed kid that didn't know much, but as it turned out, why, as these scouts would come in to talk to my parents, because they couldn't talk to me while I was in school. After I graduated, I had nothing to do with negotiations or anything, but each one of them, as they come in, was smoking a big cigar. And because of our faith, my dad wouldn't allow any tobacco in the house, but he would say, "Okay, you can leave that out. Come on in, we'll visit." And so now, this one after one, same thing, until finally the Pirates came in. And they had, instead of cigars to pass out or whatever, why, they had a box of chocolates and a dozen roses for my mother. And because the lawyer knew all about the LDS church, and so, you know, that's the way they approached it. Well, halfway through the conversation, the phone rings, and on the other end of the line is Bing Crosby. My mother, being a Bing Crosby fan, she almost fainted, thinking she was talking to the great Bing Crosby. And thankfully, as I look back on that, he gave my mother and parents some great advice. One thing he says, "Don't let your son sign for a bonus." Well, if we signed for over $5,000, why, we had to stay with the Major League club for 2 years, and probably not getting an opportunity to pitch, but very little, maybe in a mop-up game or something like that. But we just didn't have an opportunity wouldn't have an opportunity to develop some of the skills that you need to do, you know, to be able to advance and you know, have a good career. And so that was good advice, because as I look back, Harmon Killebrew signed for a nice bonus. He stayed with the ball club for 2 years, and then they sent him out. Well, it took him 3 years to get to the big leagues. it took me 2 years. From a kid that didn't even have a windup, in 2 years I was pitching in the big leagues. I learned fast. You know, I was a fast learner, and I had some good coaches that finally taught me how to play the game. Matter of fact, my first year, I had my manager ask me, he says, "Do you throw a change up?" And I said, "What's that?" I didn't know what a change-up was. He said, "Well, you take a little bit off of the ball, you know," and I didn't know how to do that. But fortunately, there was a gentleman by the name of Bill Burwell, who was my coach in Davenport, Iowa, which was Class B ball. I started out in D, and then my next year was in B ball, and then AA ball in New Orleans. And that one got my eyes open.
We'll talk about that in a second. I want to go around and talk a little bit about getting out of your home here, because each one of you got out of the world that you lived in a unique way. Marcellus, you were Superman. You were nice. You were smart. You had all of those qualities. When did you realize that football may be the road that would progress you beyond where you were?
Well, I guess in young age, before high school, I was like, this is going pretty well. You know, you compare yourself to all your teammates, and then you kind of expand from there. And locally, citywide, I guess there's no one in here from CIF or NCAA. But when you're getting recruited and you're like 9 years old to go to high schools and stuff, you're like, I'm doing okay. But
So let's talk about that.
Yeah,
by the way.
oh, you heard that from me? I said that?
You're from
Okay.
Compton, but
Yeah.
you're recruited by St. Monica's High School.
Yeah.
That's a little ways away.
Yes.
And culturally, that had to be a very different world for you, I would assume. What was it like to jump suddenly to St. Monica's High School?
Yeah, I mean, it was just because, one, it was a huge sacrifice because in order to get there in time, and my mother, we had to get up and leave the house by 5:30 in the morning. Now, I'm in high school, leaving the home, waking up at 4:45 to go to school. And I remember getting there 6:15, and no one's at school. Not even the janitors, not even the custodians. Like, I'm beating them there. I'm just at the fence. And then they will get there like 6:30, and then no students there till like 7:15, 7:30. And what I would do is just sit there with my blanket and my radio. This before iPods and stuff, so you had to actually bring a real radio. And I'm just sitting there doing my homework. I would just sit there and do my homework. I said, this is a perfect time. It's quiet. Do my homework then. Then students would file in. But the shock really came from, I guess it became a competitive battlefield for academics. It was the first time I went somewhere and actually students were challenging themselves academically in a way where the peer pressure wasn't negative all the time. It was positive peer pressure, like you do your homework, or you get on the test, oh, I got a 90. You got a 90? Oh, I got an 88. Oh, you know, that versus everywhere else I've been, it was just how many yards you had, or, you know, or how many tackles you make. And so that was pretty interesting because it really helped me to understand how far I had to challenge myself to stay competitive in the classroom as well. So I think at that young age, you start to realize that, wow, I'm on a road to something. Now, I had injuries, I had setbacks, I had all kind of things enter the picture where it was like, college time, I didn't choose a traditional football school, partly because of my upbringing. I saw too many super athletes not make it. So I didn't go to the schools that were recruiting me, a lot of Pac-10 schools. And I decided to go to an Ivy League school. I went to Columbia just because, in case nothing worked out for me athletically, Superman could still fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, yeah, we of course, USC is the Ivy League school of the West Coast.
Oh, there you go.
However, the it would seem almost no one in that circumstance would look at the situation and say, I could be in a Pac-10 school where I could be a big star, and say, no, I'll go to Columbia. What was it about the values you held, or your upbringing, or your family, that put education well before any kind of potential sports accomplishments?
Yeah, well, growing up, and I mean, it sounds like the movies, but learning firsthand how...
You don't think striking out a midget? That's
That's a better movie than the movie I had to live through, I tell you that. But, you know, living through situations that made you realize that how fickle life was, you know, watching people actually lose their life over whether it was colors or just signs or just neighborhoods. And then I obviously knew that how fickle sports was, because I had injuries. You know, I'll be out there, I'm fully trained and shaped, ready to go, and then, oh, what happened? You know, you're out for the year. I just knew how fickle everything was. And so I think that was the value that my family, you know, instilled in me, in the sense of creating that safety net. And the challenges of going somewhere and saying, okay, can I make a mark here in the way that I want to make on the field, but also can I keep up with everyone else who is not looking at me as, oh, wow, you're a football player, but, oh, you may be a dumb jock. Prove it to me that you're not. And I really took that as a challenge. And so it was just basically knowing that too many guys I grew up with, and there was one guy in particular who graduated the year before me, and he went to a Pac-10 school and he did well. They won the Rose Bowl his freshman year. And I remember when he came back to school, and it was kind of like, I was proud of him, but he came back like in his Rose Bowl sweatsuit, right? Nothing wrong with that. You should. And he had his gloves on too. Now I'm like, you kind of get a little overboard. And he had the hat on, and he came back to school, and all he could talk about, like, I'm sitting there like, wow, you went to Washington, and you won the Rose Bowl, and oh my God, like, you know, how's school, how's the transition, how's it up there in Washington? It's like super cold. And all he could talk about was like the game, like the Rose Bowl game. And I was like, it's kind of a limited experience. And I don't know why I was just sitting there like, you've been gone for a year and all you could talk about is one game. Like, and that just made me step back and say, maybe I want a different circumstance where I could talk about more than just the football experience.
That's very interesting. Mudcat, you're in Lacucci, Florida, and on the proverbial wrong side of the tracks in Lacucci, Florida. How did you first get noticed as a baseball player?
As a baseball?
Yeah.
You know, we had a lumber mill team, and I was the bat boy for about 4 years, starting at about 7 years of age. And the lumber mill team taught me how to play every position. It was between making sure that you graduate from high school and making sure that you could play every position on the baseball team. There was no football. There was a little basketball involved in there when I got to high school. But I was better than I thought that I was. I wasn't allowed to play on Sundays. Sundays was church time. You had to go to church. So I couldn't play on Sundays, but the minister knew that I was sneaking away to play on Sundays. In fact, the whole town knew that I was sneaking away to play on Sunday, but they kept it from my mom. And no matter what sermon the minister was preaching, he would look at his watch and saw what game time it was, and if it was close to a game, I kept my uniform in the parsonage of the minister. And no matter what kind of sermon he was preaching, he would sort of look at his watch and he'd look at me and he'd go like that without missing a beat. And I would run down to the ballpark and I would be the bat boy. And then a little bit later on, I started playing with the men when I was about 14 years old. If my mom got suspicious and she decided to walk down towards where the ballpark was that they were playing, the fans would hide me and make sure that mom didn't catch me at all. And as time passed, I thought that maybe I can go to college on a scholarship. That's what I did. I went to Florida A&M University, and I majored in English. And I wanted to really become an English teacher because my English teacher not only taught me music, she taught me how to write and so forth and so on. But one day, while I was in college, I happened to see a book that had endeavors, and no matter what you majored in, it had a dash point, and it had how much you would earn, how much you would make. If you were going to be a doctor, they had so much money. And if you were going to be something else, they had so much money. And if you were going to be a teacher, it was the lowest amount of money that you were going to make. And that's when I decided to become a baseball player at that time. And when I called my mom and told her that I was not going to be a teacher, I was going to be a baseball player. Now, I really wanted to be an English teacher, but when I saw that salary amount, it still ain't enough to this day, but when I saw that, that's when I decided to become a baseball player. And I left college, and I went to the Cleveland Indians minor league camp, and I was there for the whole camp, and lo and behold, the last day of camp, they thought that I could be a pretty good professional ball player, and that's when but my mom wouldn't let me go unless I promised to go back to college and finish, which I did do. And everything worked out pretty good. But thanks to those men and women in that town of LaCouture, Florida, who supported me, I became a Major League ball player.
So you had an extended family. Tell us how you got the nickname Mudcat.
Mudcat. When I went to camp in the minor leagues to try to become a professional ball player, I was a little ragged kid from LaCouture, Florida. And back in those days, they thought all black people was from Mississippi. And when I walked into the camp, there was a player by the name of Leroy Bartow Irby. And I wasn't dressed the best as a country kid. I didn't have it. I had tennis shoes and so forth and so on. And they said, "Who is that guy?" Somebody said, "Well, he got to be from Mississippi." And this gentleman, Leroy Bartow Irby, said, "Then he's a Mississippi Mudcat." That's how I got the nickname Mudcat. And for the longest, that's what they were calling me, Mudcat. And when I got to the major leagues, that's what it became, Mudcat Grant. Yeah. So
let's talk then about each of you played on what was, at the time you played it, the largest sports stage in the United States. And yet each one of you still, the issues of race didn't go away. And so I want to start with Mudcat. When you got to the major leagues, what was your experience of the continuing racial tensions in the United States in the late 50s and early 60s in the major leagues?
Well, you got to remember, you got to go back a little bit. Regardless of where you went, there was racism. There's no doubt about that. When you were born in 1935, there was racism. When you got older, there was racism. And there was a racism. It's something that you never learn to live with, but you do learn to deal with. And when I got to the major leagues, I was the only starting African-American pitcher in the American League at that time. It was difficult with the catchers, because the catchers were all white kids, and like the old black quarterback type of thing, they didn't think that black starting pitchers could really manipulate 9 innings and so forth and so on, but you learn how to deal with that also. I found myself asking for advice from a lot of the older ball players, but I was also getting a lot of advice from home in terms of that circumstance. You played more like for the game itself. There were still restaurants that you couldn't go to. For an example, we spring trained in Arizona. In order to eat in a restaurant, you had to look at the daily newspaper every day, and the newspaper would they would tell you what restaurant that you could go and eat at that time. In terms of the hotels, you had to stay in the basement. You couldn't. And when I got to the major leagues, you could eat breakfast, but you couldn't eat in the dining room. But back in those days, your upbringing had a lot to do with how successful actually you were going to be. We were raised and we were taught that no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances are, of course you try to keep yourself out of harm's way, because we got a lot of threatening phone calls. When you travel with the team, you were going to get shot, or you were going to do this or that. But you still had to develop a type of strength inside that you were going to be the best that you could possibly be. And get advice from the other African American players that was there as to what you should do, how you should proceed into becoming as good as you possibly can, and didn't have to worry about what someone, for an example, the first year I played minor league baseball, they sent me to Fargo, North Dakota, because the other minor league team would not allow us to play in Tifton, Georgia. So they sent 3 African American players to Fargo, North Dakota. That was the first time in my life that you could walk the streets at night. And I remember 3 of us, we used to just walk the streets at night because we could walk the streets at night. We didn't have to worry about anybody, in Fargo at least, we didn't have to worry about anybody stopping you, you know, because of your color or that type of thing. Again, we were taught to be the best that you could possibly be, but there was racism even in the major leagues at that time, because Jackie Robinson had come and gone, and of course that's just the way that it was.
Marcellus, the NFL is often seen as the most forward-thinking league, sports league in the world, or certainly the United States. But the Richie Incognito story has brought back a whole series of difficult conversations for the NFL. Going into an NFL locker room, did you experience racism? What kind of racism was there? Was this an open problem in locker room?
Well, where they are currently in the wake of Richard Incognito, Riley Cooper, the N-word, ER, N-word A, the legislation, maybe that will be passed to enforce a rule where you can't use the N-word or you get penalized 15 yards, personal foul. It's a different NFL. The N-word was pervasive. It was thrown around left and right. I used it. Everyone used it. And it wasn't really of an issue. And it was a weird dynamic going to NFL because I grew up in Compton, so I'm not really around anyone but blacks. And I grew up in Compton, which almost became marketed as far as ghetto life and, celebrity ghetto life. Like, wow, you're from Compton. Like, everyone thought you already had murdered 2 people when you say hello, it was, I use it to my advantage at times in the sense of going to Columbia and the people are like, wow, you're from Compton? Yeah, like, yeah, I'm from Compton, what's up? And then, but you understand that now I'm going from that world where I grew up on welfare, food stamps, everyone in line with me that's getting welfare and food stamps are black. Then I walk into an NFL locker room where it's 80, 90% black, but everyone in there is making hundreds of thousands of dollars at the minimum, and a lot of the guys are making millions of dollars, and you're like, whoa. You go into the parking lot and you're like, wow, whose cars are these? And they're like, oh, that's my car during the week. Then you show up on game day and they bring out their real good car. And you're like, whoa, what's this? And you look at that dynamic, and then the funny thing is the racism that really, if there is a sembling of it, it's the fact that the semblance comes from, you look up in the owner's box, and you see, wow, where's the reflection of us on this field in this locker room upstairs in that owner's box? And you didn't see that during my playing days. And I think that was a little uncomfortable for a lot of guys because they didn't see the upward mobility unless they went out there and hit people and made plays and ran for yards. And that wasn't anything overt, but it was a message being sent to a lot of guys that, okay, maybe the path you're trying to choose, which is physical athletics, which has a finite shelf life, when that comes to an end, what are you going to do now? And the executive role wasn't really something that a lot of guys were thinking about because they didn't see the opportunities there. So,
Did you feel as if you were uninvited to the executive life in the NFL?
it was yeah, I guess not in the sense of you can't come up here, but in the sense of we're not inviting you to come up here as well. So I guess it was two-way. No one was trying to beat at the door, it seemed like. And we didn't see that. We saw that that was really the issue on the sidelines. We needed more black head coaches. But no one, once again, ambition. No one was saying we need more black owners at that time. We were just worrying about can we coach our own. I remember one story a guy pointed out, and it was something that I took notice to. My last year in Jacksonville, I know I'm done because physically I just can't do it anymore. And I remember I was getting these stingers, and stingers are when you get slight paralysis from like your neck to your fingers. So you hit somebody and then all of a sudden you can't feel your arm for 30 seconds to a minute. It's nothing major, but those 30 seconds to a minute feel like hell, you know? And you're like, oh, God. And the next play is coming, so you're like, I'm one-arm Willie out here, and I got to go play this next play. But I remember I was going through these stingers every single game, 16 straight games, stinger, stinger, stinger. And I remember one time laying there, and then I got up, and coach was like, get out, Wiley. And I was like, no, I'm good. And then I remember getting to the huddle, and I remember just looking up at the owner's box. And it's just like this room almost configured where this is a football field, and the owner's box is just that prime seat right there where that window is. And I remember looking at my owner, and I don't know my owner. He was older than me. He's somewhere in between us, you know, us three up here. And he was playing with his grandkids eating a hot dog. Yeah. And I remember looking at him like, man, this dude eating a hot dog playing with his kids, and I'm over here can't even feel my arm. Something wrong with this. Something wrong with this picture right here. And that was just one of the moments. It wasn't racist. It wasn't a racial moment. But I just looked at that dynamic and said, isn't that interesting? That guy pays for the salaries of all 53 of us, and still has profit. And I'm sitting out here, I can't feel my arm, and he's eating hot dogs. That said something to me, and it made me say we need to think about upward mobility.
Yeah, creating not just upward mobility, but mobility into a different playing field. I mean, the ownership is its own playing field, yeah. And if you're excluded from it, you're not playing the game. So exactly. It's, you know, that's one of the challenges to this day, and as you know, it hasn't changed. In baseball or football or basketball, fundamentally ownership is largely tied with a very limited group of people. So how do we break through that?
Well, I mean, like you said, I think there's one black owner. I want to say the Houston Texans, Magic Johnson, of course, Michael Jordan. So slowly but surely you're seeing guys have that participation at that level. Like anything, that the success will breed another group of guys with those aspirations as well as those opportunities. Because now the Michael Jordans and Magic Johnsons have that Rolodex that can be valuable for someone who's trying to grab the next rung on the ladder. And I think that, and also what's going to actually happen, which I see now, is you're seeing more scholar athletes who are understanding that, okay, let me take my studies seriously, because when I'm done playing football, whether it's broadcasting or the fact that I do want to walk into the real world and have upward mobility and management, they don't want to just hear about how many plays I made. And I don't think that my generation even thought about that and was forward thinking in that respect. We were just saying ball till you fall. That's what everyone would say, ball till you fall. And then when you fall down and it's over, spend all that money and live a happy life. Live off the fat of the land. And I think now guys are saying, Magic Johnson's worth $500 million, and he's like, what's next? You know, whereas before there was this negative connotation to anyone who retired and worked. Like if you retired in the NFL and you worked, they're like, damn, you spent all your money already? You're like, no, I'm just trying to do something else. But now that connotation has changed because of guys that are actual owners now.
Okay, great. Let's hop back from 2012 to about 1947, 48. You leave Meridian, Idaho, the valley. I think you've said you had you knew of one African American family there, and you land in New Orleans, again in the middle of the Jim Crow South. What did you experience there, and why was it so shocking to you?
Well, simply because being out in Idaho country, and a lot of people call it Marlboro country, but you know, it's sagebrush and rabbits and those kind of things. But as far as my only dealings at all with that one black family had an athlete, and he was the only one that I saw in Idaho. Mm-hmm. And great athlete, great kid. Everybody liked him. He had an infectious smile and just a great young man. And he was well accepted. And that's all I saw. Mm-hmm. But then when I got to New Orleans, that was a different picture for me. I mean, my belief system and the things that I saw, I couldn't believe. The way that these people were being treated. You'll have to excuse me. I can get emotional about this sort of thing because I wasn't used to that kind of life. You know, seeing people being pushed back and abused and in every sense of the word. I'm old enough that I saw what happened in the major leagues and how. I had the opportunity of pitching against Jackie Robinson more than once. I had nothing but admiration and great respect for Jackie because of his life, because he graduated here.
UCLA.
Well, in
LA.
In LA here, you know, and just a great athlete, not just in baseball, but he could do a lot of things and well educated, just a wonderful individual, man, someone that you looked up to and respected, and to see what happened with him was really most shocking because, and like you say, in New Orleans, that's where it started for me because I've never seen black people treated in a way that you wouldn't treat my dog at home. You know, that was just ridiculous to see how folks were being treated. There were black, toilets, black drinking fountains, white, black. Even on the bus, they were pushed to the back of the bus. They had a sign on the seats that black people go to the rear of the bus. The front people, sitting up front were white. If there was not room for the white people to sit down, the black people got up and stood, and they moved that little sign back so the white people could sit down. And so it was a complete shock to me to see what was going on, and I being born and raised that people needed to be loved and cared for and respected. You respect people's property. You do all, you treat everyone as you'd like to be treated. Well, that didn't happen, and of course, when I got to Pittsburgh and when we went into Brooklyn for the first time, and what I saw. I don't know if any of you have seen 24?
42.
Or 42? Yeah. Well, there's a pretty good player that wore 24 too. But anyway, I hope that if you haven't seen it, go see it because that'll give you an idea of what happened with Jackie Robinson. What you see is just a sampling. That's still. It didn't go into some of the other things that took place. I remember that trip into Brooklyn for the first time, and the language that came from the bench our dugout, from even from the stands. All of this, I'd never heard those kind of words before, but I knew what they were what they meant, and I you know, that was not in my vocabulary at all because of my upbringing. Being born and raised by a good family that we went to church like Mudcat every Sunday. I wasn't supposed to play baseball on Sunday, but and I didn't have to my first half year in the game. But as I got into better competition, and this really bothered me because I know Sunday was created for other purposes, not to play sports or entertainment or something. You know, we were taught that you visit the poor, and the sick, and you don't go outside and play football or baseball or whatever. You think about other things, and there's always things that you can do, you know, as a family, which we did. But after I got into better classification of baseball, I could see that this was going to cause problems. And so, like I say, it bothered me. I even talked to the general authorities of the church in Salt Lake City about this, and they said, what did you do before you played baseball for a living? I said, well, we lived on a farm, we milked cows, took care of the animals. Was that your livelihood? Yes, that was our livelihood. He says, well, you've signed a contract, haven't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, okay. That contract, if you're going to honor the contract, then you know you're going to have to pitch on Sunday once in a while if you're a starting pitcher. And I said, yes. He says, well, okay. You know, what you do, you go to church as often as you can, you know, and maintain your, you know, your spirituality, and keep your nose clean, make right choices, and do things that you're supposed to do, and everything will be just fine. You know, don't worry about it. You know, do your best. I don't know how much success I had on Sunday, but I didn't like to lose on Sunday. I know that, and so I did give it my best effort. But getting back to Jackie, you know what I tell people? I say that he had indeed have to be a better man than me, because I couldn't take what he took.
I think Mudcat
Yeah.
wanted to comment.
Yeah,
You slide in second base and have somebody stand over and call you dirty SOB or whatever, you know.
Yeah. I know how it
Oh,
was.
you got to respond, but thank goodness Branch Rickey, who brought him in. I had a very good relationship with him because he came over to the Pirates. And he and I had some conversations, and he did. He talked to Jack. He says, you can't respond, because if you do, it's going to spoil it for others that are coming in.
Yeah.
You know, and so anyway, go ahead, Mud. You want to add some?
No. Well, you go right ahead. I'll wait until you finish. You go right ahead.
But anyway, you know, what I saw and heard, I just could not believe. And I'm glad, you know, I tell people I played in the golden days of baseball because we finally got it right. We finally got it right. And thanks to
Yeah.
Branch Rickey, that happened.
Mudcat?
Okay. No. I want to make sure he finishes because, you know, we've been around a long time. But I was so glad to see you because I have 34 great-grandchildren, and I'm having yeah, I have 34, and I really, when I saw you, I was so happy because I really want to. They're asking me tons of questions, and I guess it has to do with where you grew up or what was allowable at the time that you grew up, and I'm trying to come up with the generation to the point where not only in sports, but kids just running around where the N-word became passe. I mean, it just, you know, what generation was that? Because when we came in to play baseball, if you used that N-word, that was a fight. Whether it was black, white, or whatever, it was just a fight. And the kids that you played with, that was just not allowable because people use it enough against you. So, and it's trying to explain to my great-grannies what generation was that. Well, that's what you did. Hey, what's happening, my dog, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I would tell you this. Growing up, born in 1974, so my impressionable years are the early 80s. And I remember when the word was thrown around the community kind of in that era. NWA, the N, as you know, stands for that word. And what happened was there was a disconnect from the pain of the word, and the word tried to materialize into something different where everyone said it was a term of endearment. But what really happened is everyone got desensitized to the circumstances and the conditions and the pain you had to go through with that word. Now, some people would say that's a derivative of actual progress, because imagine my parents who didn't have to go through what you went through, and they're saying, okay, mom and dad, I understand you had to go to the black water fountain, but I didn't. Okay, so now for a better life for my child, they don't have to. And then all of a sudden, my parents are not having the same conversations with me that your parents had with you. You know, your mother was 9 years a slave. Then there's you, who had to also go through the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Then you have children. And that's my mother's generation, where she's like, I didn't have to experience it, but I heard it through story. And now I'm not even hearing the story. And then there's this word that is taboo, and then all of a sudden the rationale becomes, well, they tried to define us by this word, well, let me flip it on them. And I was a participant of the N-word until I saw 2 movies last year, 12 Years a Slave and The Butler. Now, The Butler rattled me. The Butler rattled me, but it didn't stop me from using the word. It made me say, okay, I'm very conscious of this word right now, self-conscious when I'm using it. And I remember having conversations with a couple of my friends, and they're like, man, that word, please. Like, I ain't even trying to hear what you're saying. And I'm like, whoa. And then I went and saw 12 Years a Slave, and the perspective that gave me, because of how it was portrayed and how you really had to really look at the moments and the pictorial and say, that's different than I've ever thought of the experience. And then I just stopped using it from that point on. And it's interesting now that I look at the NFL, I look at, you know, my neighborhood, I go back to see all my friends and even professional friends who still use the word. And it's a battle that I will always profess where I am now, but it's a battle that is very difficult to talk to individual by individual and really persuade them to stop it. It's almost like they have to come to that place by themselves.
Yeah.
Mudcat, that's all that I remember too, is the N-word and black.
Yeah.
That's all. There was no such thing as people of color or the Afro-American or whatever, you know, and that, and I want to say something else too, because even as far-reaching as this racism gone, it was there, I guess, in when I was growing up as a kid. We used to make you know, we'd find a fork in a tree and put a rubber band on with a piece of leather in the back, and we'd shoot that. They called that a nigger flipper.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure that probably you saw some of that. I was completely innocent about, you know, using that in that term. Oh God, I look back at that, and I said, well, even I participated in that part of it by calling that thing that I had that I shot birds with as the nigger flipper. I had no idea that there was any context there between racism and the black people and all that. That's what that was used for. No, I knew nothing about that. Yeah. But that was awful. You know, I mean, to have that experience and look back on it and didn't know. I was even a participant, you know.
We say it's a commonplace. What's in a word? It goes back to Shakespeare. And a rose by any other name. Not knowing, but the word shows up and shows up. It is the word, even in and of itself. It's what it represents. It's the embodiment of so much. And there are other words as well that are equally bad, and they're within the context, but it doesn't go away. In Meridian, Idaho, in Compton, in Lacucci, Florida, in Los Angeles, California, at USC, America likes to talk about itself so often as if we are ahead of the issues of race and other difficult issues. We never really are. We're still chasing. Which is a really uncomfortable place to finish.
Right.
But maybe for everybody in the room, the best place to finish, it would be a lot better to finish with a joke, but perhaps the best place to finish, since we've gone way over time. But I really do also, one more time, want to thank Jim Mudcat Grant, Marcellus Wiley, Vernon Law for their time, for a very interesting and difficult conversation. Thank you very much.